the part of the brain that's associated with registering physical pain, like someone pinching you, lights up when someone rejects you. Being alone almost certainly meant death. That stressor begins to energize you and make you feel excited.
Everyone, thank you for coming to the Dance Mind Wellness podcast. And today we are joined by Dr. Lauren Hofschneider, a psychology professor at Los Angeles City College who earned her PhD in health psychology from UCLA. And her work focuses on health psychology, social inequalities, and the emotional and behavior effects on certain insecurities, certain behaviors, and etc. She teaches courses including Introduction to Psychology, Social Psychology, Health Psychology, and Research Methods. And she does a really good job of mentoring her students in psychology and bringing how amazing psychology is to life. So thank you for coming on today. I'm so excited. To start off, can you share about your journey in psychology? What was your passion? I know you had an undergrad in health psychology at UC Irvine. So what kind of sparked your interest in doing psychology in the first place?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And you did such a great job. I'm impressed with so much research you did beforehand. I could not have given myself a better introduction. I got my undergrad at UC Irvine, and the major at the time was called Social and Behavioral Sciences, I believe. And initially, that wasn't my major. So I grew up in a house where stability was sort of the main priority in going to school. And for my parents, what that looked like was me becoming a pharmacist. So since I was a kid, I did love the sciences. I initially wanted to be a veterinarian, but I was allergic to most animals, so that wasn't really a feasible job. So I thought, all right, I'll be a doctor for a different kind of animal that I'm not allergic to, and that's humans. But my parents knew me well before I knew myself very well. They said, well, you're probably going to freak out around blood, cutting people up, and they were right. I think now I just wouldn't have the stomach for a career like that. And so the happy medium that, whether it was by my own volition or their volition, was to become a pharmacist. So I applied to several schools. I got accepted to UC Irvine as a chemistry major, and I really enjoyed that major as an undergraduate student. Or rather, as a high school student. But when I got to my undergraduate studies, I was completely lost. I did not grow up in the US, so our academic curriculum was not the same. So although I qualified to take certain advanced courses, for example, jump straight into calculus, my pre-calculus courses were the equivalent of the US's Algebra 2. So there was a big year of information, I think, that I was missing. In addition, I wasn't prepared for some of the rigor, like taking a chemistry lab and writing a lab report. Didn't know what that was. So I was relying on the kindness of my classmates for notes, for questions, for how to create a lab report. And I felt it was pretty demoralizing. I'm someone who, for better or worse, when I was younger, I was very stubborn, so I didn't like asking for help. And I felt very ashamed for asking for help. So I left the major after 2 semesters. And that left me in an unusual space where I was left to explore. I was an undeclared major. But shortly after, because I was involved in a club where we worked with children who have autism, all of the seniors in the club were psychology majors. I really liked the people, the president of the club. We were all really close, and I just asked them a lot of questions about their interests, their hobbies, and considering that we share the same ones, I figured that whatever they're studying, I might like it too. They told me to try out Psych 1 as a elective, and if I like it, maybe consider majoring in it. And immediately everything clicked. I think as a young kid, one of my biggest passions was reading, and in particular, reading fiction. And when you read a really good fiction book where the author can tap into somebody's mind, it always left me floored, especially books like Russian novels. I was a huge fan of Tolstoy as a high schooler, or even books like Little Women. Understanding everyone's unique sense of expression and behavior and emotional processes, I thought was so amazing. I thought to achieve that, you have to be a writer, but I quickly learned that you could be a psychologist as well. So declaring my major in psychology brought that alignment with what has always been an interest of mine in the background, but never having the language or the formal education to put a lot of what I was interested into a field of study.
Yeah. Oh my God, that is so inspiring and so motivational. And I think that shows how cool psychology is, where you're saying in the book you can kind of like delve deeper into the different characters and their personalities and the psychology of each character. That is so amazing. Moving a little bit forward, you just now talked about how like with your books, psychology is such an complex subject where you get to, learn more about people. And when I was taking your psychology course, you talked a lot about how us as people have this complex thing of our performance levels are different based on how our environment. So, for example, if we were the difference between how we will perform when we are watched versus being when we're not watched. And I think in dance environments, people are always being watched, we're always being evaluated, and we're always being compared. And this can often make us feel like people's opinions really do matter. And as for me, as a dancer, I'm deeply affected by what other people think of me and how I dance. And can you explain a little bit of why do other people's opinions affect our self-esteem so strongly?
That is such a multi-layered question. But I could take you back several millions of years.
Yeah.
When we think of how humans have evolved, we evolved as group animals. So we know that some animals tend to flock together, other animals generally thrive being alone, or maybe within their small family unit. When humans evolved, they survived in semi-large groups, about 25 to 50 people at most. And we could think about that today, where like 50 people, I probably have more people on my Instagram, but these 50 people we knew very intimately. These are people we shared food with, we hunted with, we grew food with, we helped raise everybody else's children. And the reason why humans need to survive in groups is because we're not very strong. So if you think about the lone human taking on other potential predators, such as lions and bears, we cannot survive alone.
Yes.
Being alone almost certainly meant death. So if we did something in our small group of 50 where we acted dishonestly, we were a jerk, we took somebody's tools, broke it, and didn't offer a replacement, maybe we put someone in danger, maybe we slept with someone's partner, what that creates is a sense of distrust. That person will then be ostracized and kicked out of that group. And what that means is certainly a death penalty. So that person who got kicked out of the social group is almost sentenced, almost guaranteed to die. And it's one of the reasons why, to this day, when humans get kicked out of their social group, it feels so painful. That's why you get that feeling of FOMO when you open up your stories and you see your friends doing things without you. Psychologically, what that taps into in that very ancient part of our brain is us getting kicked out of that small group of 50, and that we're no longer wanted and we're very likely not to survive. So we inherited this ancient programming that says we need to care about what other people think in order for us to survive. It doesn't feel that way now because we created a society where people can live alone. We think about how we conquered other animals, lions and tigers and bears. We put them in cages, or at the very least, we build thick enough walls and strong enough windows where they can't just burst through and get us. Now, the things that make us stressed out, the things that set the course for us to get ill, to get sick, have to do with stressors we experience from other people. In the lab, if you want to see someone's stress hormones go up, you put them through what we call an ego threatening stressor, meaning we try to attack your self esteem. The way they do this in the lab is that they'll put you into a room, you'll have 3 people, stone faced, ask you to do a very difficult mental math problem. Every time they make a mistake, the fake researchers will say, wrong, start from the top. They'll keep doing this for several minutes. Now, let's say you're a whiz at math. What they'll also do in the second part of this task is to make you do a public speaking task for why you're perfect for your dream job. But again, these researchers have the goal of making you feel bad. So they'll say, yeah, that's not interesting. Do you have any other qualities? They'll essentially psychologically, in an ethical way, try to put you down. 20 minutes later, we're going to see your stress hormones rise up. So we do feel a very strong sense, both physically and psychologically, of pain when we are rejected from others. There's even another study that was done at UCLA showing that social rejection, so when you know that people don't like you or they don't want to involve you in a simple computer task, the part of the brain that's associated with registering physical pain, like someone pinching you, lights up when someone rejects you. So our bodies are very overwhelmingly aware when other people don't like us. So that's one of the reasons why we feel very impacted, especially in terms of our self-esteem when people don't like us.
Thank you. That's really, really interesting, especially when you were going back into how this all started from our ancestors and now it's carrying it through now. And I think as dancers, it's like really helpful for us to remember that when people don't like us, it's not a real threat. It's just us remembering our ancestors, like us just evolving and taking in what our ancestors had to go through. And based on that, how can you stop letting people's opinions affect you? And how do you downplay it?
That's a tough one. I feel like that would be a great question for a therapist versus, a researcher slash psychology instructor. But I'll give you more anecdotal evidence. So with my own personal experience about not letting other people get to you, I think when I was younger, there were a few things that came into play. One, I'm very stubborn, so I don't like asking for help. And 2, I undervalued the importance of making mistakes. I think that at the time, making a mistake was a signal for failure. But having studied psychology a lot, making mistakes is actually part of the learning process, and it can even reinforce or strengthen your ability to get good at a particular task or skill. But I would say that in terms of the person-to-person interactions, meditation really helps. Being able to decenter yourself from what we are often engaging as an imaginary conflict between you and the other person, right? I have this saying that some things are never as bad as what you think they are. Meaning you're having an issue with your dance coach, you're having an issue with another dancer. A lot of that conflict is in the mind. When you actually are able to talk it out and see from the other person's perspective, you realize it's not exactly what you imagined. And let's say, even if it is as bad as you imagined or as difficult of a conflict as you imagine it to be, meditating allows you to just focus on the present. So, for example, if someone is angry at you, you could use that time and energy to figure out what to do with that person. Or you could think, all right, is this person's anger putting me in danger? Is this person's anger reflective of who I am as a person? Because when we start tying our emotions to how people react to us, that's when we start feeling how our self-esteem becomes impacted. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm able to separate my self-esteem from another person's emotional reactivity, I feel a lot more safe and a lot more secure. And I don't feel as threatened when interacting with someone who might be a little more aggressive. It's something that, I encounter as an instructor. Sometimes people don't like the feedback you give, or maybe some people put out their frustrations on you. And sometimes it's not quite fair. And sometimes maybe I could see where they're coming from. But as long as I'm able to decenter myself from that conflict and do the best that I can, it's easier for me to create that separation and let go and not tie my self-esteem to that conflict.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. And I think it reminds me, and it could remind a lot of other people, the importance of meditating, because I think when a bad thought comes into my mind, I don't see how bad it can affect me. And based on your clinical research and just like your studies, how does these negative thoughts affect our performance and our self-esteem and confidence?
Yeah, it depends on several things. One thing I could think of is something you probably learned in my Psych 13 class, and that is the Lazarus and Folkman theory of stress and coping. And essentially, it works like this. When something stresses us out, or when something bad, negative, unusual, surprising happens, we think about the problem in two stages. In the very first stage, we evaluate the situation. Is this dangerous, bad, concerning? If so, I'm going to be stressed out. If not, you kind of brush it off. Now, what happens when you deem this event as stressful? Well, now you start thinking about yourself. So you think, do I have the resources that I need to cope with the situation? If I do, I then see this stressor as a challenge. So, for example, you have been practicing and dancing multiple hours every day. You have this big recital, all eyes are on you. But when you're able to tell yourself, hey, I did the work, I had all that practice, I'm going to kill it tonight, it's going to be great. That stressor begins to energize you and make you feel excited. However, if you begin to doubt yourself and you see it as this insurmountable challenge, it's something that, oh, well, no matter how many hours I practice, I'll never be good enough, then you start seeing that stressor as a threat. And this is where we start to see a lot of the negative aspects of stress appear. This is where we start to see our immune system get weaker. This is when we start to see those stress hormones start floating around our body. So seeing something as either a challenge or a threat makes a huge difference in terms of our physical performance on a task, but also in terms of the physical toll it has on our body.
Yeah, thank you. That's just such a good reminder for me that taking care of your mental health is so important, because I think as dancers, we care so much about our physical technique, how well we're strong, how well our capability is with our physical body, but sometimes we don't realize that our mental health has so much effect on our body. Like how you were saying, if you perceive something as a challenge, it can actually help our body and enhance our dancing. So thank you so much. Yeah, and you were talking about how the different mindsets affects the way you dance, and I know when I was taking your course, you were talking about bottom up and top down for self-esteem. And I just kind of wanted to ask, like, what is the effect on, how can someone gain confidence in their dancing that's not tied to how well they do in a performance?
Hmm. Yeah, so this is a great question because my really good friend from graduate school, Dr. Daniel Rosenfeld, had just published a book called The Confidence Equation. So, how to build confidence as an introvert. As someone who's pretty extroverted, I still found a lot of his ideas insightful. And something that really stuck to me was reflecting about my own perceptions of failure in practice. As I mentioned before, when I was younger, I didn't see the merit in practice. In fact, I used to for a good 3 months. I was a dancer. I did ballet class. I was the oldest one there, by 2 years, or 1 year at most. But, when you're 7, that year gap feels like you're worlds away from the other people.
Yes.
And on top of that, I was the least flexible person there. So within 2, 3 weeks, my sister learned how to do the splits. I was barely able to move my legs. I was not, and to this day, I'm not the best at complex choreography. And it's just too many moving parts in my brain. And when I would compare myself to the other young dancers, I just thought that meant I wasn't born to be a dancer, and that when you take on a new skill, you had to either be good at it or you had to be someone who learns quick. And as someone who did well in school, academically, many things click for me and I learn quick. Therefore, I'm a smart student. However, because dancing took a lot longer for me to understand and grasp, I therefore cannot be a dancer. So going back to what Dr. Rosenfeld mentions is that when you practice, it could help to create moments where you see certain tasks, certain accomplishments as a milestone. And he talks about having tokens to remind yourself of accomplishing that milestone. So he has cerebral palsy, which means that certain fine muscles have a little more difficulty with fluid movements. He can't do certain fine motor movements with his fingers, but he decided he was going to learn 1 or 2 songs on the guitar. Does he play the guitar every day? No. Has he picked it up recently? No, but he keeps his guitar in the corner as a way to remind himself that he could do this, that he is capable of taking on a very challenging task. And even though he's not playing at the level of, Led Zeppelin or other famous guitarists, he's able to look back on these moments and feel that sense of accomplishment. So for young dancers, having milestones, whether that is learning a certain routine, performing at a certain event, keep that ticket for the event. Keep a small video or a journal when you accomplish that routine so that you could look back and remember it. For me personally, something that I started doing after I finished my doctorate degree is taking up other hobbies. So I think my self-esteem was really tied into this identity of someone who is very smart enough to get to a PhD program. But just as I imagine with the art world and the dance sphere, the higher you go up, you're with these elite group of dancers, just like I was with these elite groups of academics. And it's very easy to fall into this trap of where you're comparing yourself to others. So hobbies I took up was learning French, learning art. I'm a charcoal artist and a painter, and cooking, baking. All of these things give me this sense of joy so that, hey, I didn't get a paper published. At least I have this beautiful charcoal drawing that I'm going to show to my friends. Oh, I struggled and didn't find the results I wanted on an experiment. At least I had a really great dinner that night. So finding other ways that you could develop your self-esteem. You talked about top-down versus bottom-up self-esteem. one theory with the bottom up self-esteem is that if you build self-esteem in small little pockets, that eventually will have a trickle up effect where your overall self-esteem will be high. Versus top down, let's start off with high self-esteem. Let's do these psychological hacks to increase my self-esteem so that it'll trickle down into these other domains. In my personal life, I subscribe to the bottom up approach where let me try something new, let me make new friends, let me try this hobby. And even if it doesn't turn out great, at least I have a lot of progress to show that I am improving. So I have a lot of art, like the things that you see here. I don't draw or paint like this anymore, but every time I look at it, I'm proud of myself that 3 years ago, I made a big painting and now my skill set is completely different. So that would be my sort of thoughts on that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think especially for me, like you were saying that we need to find these little tokens. And I think for me, like when one thing I'm not good at, for example, in dance, I struggle a lot with mentally remembering the choreography and like learning it fast with spacing and all of that. And I think sometimes just because of that one thing, I come to the conclusion of, oh, I'm a slow learner or I'm not smart. So I think what you were saying with finding these small tokens, it's really helpful it's really helpful for me to not tie myself to, oh, I'm not smart. I could find little tokens that will not go to the conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and going with that, I've had a lot of dancers ask me, and I've also wondered this too, in auditions where we're really nervous and we're trying out for a certain role, or we're trying to get accepted into a certain ballet company where we really want to do our best. As in your research, is it better for us to be stressed out or not stressed out? Because I know there's a good level of stress that can make you feel really, like you were saying, excited, but then there's also a stress that will make us go not good.
Interestingly, I don't know too much about what is this optimal level of, we'll call it reactivity or arousal, right? Because stress could feel different. It could feel like buzzing in the brain. It could feel like jitters. It could feel like butterflies in your stomach. What some research suggests is that you need to identify a flow state. And it's not so much about mindset as much as it is about behaviors. As far as I know, I haven't done too much deep research in the area, but I'll give an example. When I first started drawing, let me give another example. What flow state refers to is finding a activity that isn't too boring, where you don't put a lot of effort, but also not doing an activity that is too extreme, where your performance actually decreases because maybe you're not fluent in that skill, meaning it doesn't come as easy to you, or you're extending yourself beyond your capabilities or your level of preparedness. When you find that nice middle spot, you're able to enter a flow state where time goes by quickly, where you're able to move with ease. It becomes second nature to you. So I don't necessarily know exactly whether or not your stress levels can help you enter a flow state. But I think maybe to adapt the question just a little bit is maybe don't do a routine that is so ambitious where you are exceeding your level of preparedness, but also don't do something that's just too easy that you could do in your sleep. To try to find that middle ground where 50-60% is something you could do in your sleep, and then 40% of the routine is something that's novel and new and interesting to you. So that would probably be my advice for where you want to fall along that spectrum.
And going on with that, I think with stress levels, do you have any like psychological advice to help calm performance nerves? Like, for example, if a ballet dancer is about to go on stage and they're feeling really, really nervous, what are some things based on your research that you have learned that will help calm those nerves?
I think it could do with cognitive reframing. We also call this cognitive restructuring, where we could interpret this same event in two ways. Two dancers are going up and they are going to do the exact same routine. One person feels excited by this, who sees it as a challenge versus a threat. The other dancer goes in and begins to mentally feel paralyzed. They think that this is beyond their capabilities. They are overly concerned about every mistake that they would make. Let's say they make the same number of mistakes. They misstep or maybe went a little too fast in their timing. The person who sees this as something exciting and a challenge is able to move on faster and continue on with the routine with ease, both physically and psychologically. Someone who is fixated on the mistakes that they made, well, they are going up against two challenges: this challenging routine they need to perform in other people, but also the mental challenge where they're trying to calm their voice down while still trying to remember that routine. So I would say that engaging in cognitive restructuring, this is sort of an easy piece of advice, but to see a therapist, I do really think that, especially for people who are perfectionists, being able to talk to someone about these challenges and getting some support in reframing these challenges is especially important, especially for anyone who is considering entering a competitive space. Something that I think of as well is giving yourself the time and the space and the grace for moments of relaxation, because it doesn't always have to be work, 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 to the point where you exhaust yourself. Maybe this is an outlier, a sample of one, but I'm thinking about Olympic figure skater Alyssa Liu, she was out of the game for a few years, but I think that rest and relaxation gave her the mental resilience to re-enter the sport and allow her to be more present, so that she's not only taking care of her mind, but also her body. We could think about Simone Biles and the other Olympics that I think, can't remember if it had to have been Paris, but she stepped out. She said, hey, I'm not feeling well. If I go on and I am not mentally prepared, that could also be devastation for my physical body and my love for the sport. So sometimes maybe taking breaks, whether that means that you spend one day instead of practicing, maybe this is bad advice since I'm not a dancer, but maybe skip one day of practice and mentally you're not there, take a sick day, because you have to treat this like a job as much as I treat teaching like a job. If I am mentally not there and not able to be present with my students, they're not going to learn as well. If I'm physically sick and I'm not able to teach, even though I'm able to talk, not only am I not serving myself, but I'm also going to make my students sick as well. So just being protective of your mental health and being able to be aware of whether or not this could even pose danger to your body. Because the last thing you want is to overexert yourself where maybe you sustain an injury and that cuts the career short.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I think it's a really good reminder for dancers to, if you're sick or you're injured, how important it is to rest. And you're saying that the human mind needs rest in order to keep going. And I think that's a really good concept to just make myself understand and grasp more deeply. Another question that I've had was, as dancers, we are always, and I know when you were talking about Alyssa Liu, you're talking about she took a break, and that really helped her. But she also had this mindset of it's okay to not be perfect. And
Mm.
I was wondering, like, as dancers who are in a competitive sport, what is the effect on our performance levels when we're always striving to be perfect?
Hmm. It reminds me of that study you were referencing at the top of this episode, where you were talking about these famous Zhejiang studies. I'm not quite sure to this day if I'm saying his last name correctly, but the idea is this, where if you are performing a task that is easy and you're doing that task in front of other people, you experience what is called social facilitation, meaning that you perform very well on that task. So if I had to do mental math, 2 plus 2 in front of people, 4 comes easily to me. If I had to do what we, as I was mentioning before, is called the Trier social stress task, where I have to subtract 2,513 minus 7 up to 0 in front of other people, I'm going to become worse at that task. So when we're striving for perfectionism, especially for very difficult tasks, and I can imagine for ballet dancers who are pushing their bodies to the limit, but also making a career of doing that in front of other people, this is where we start to see the flip side of those famous experiments. If we're doing a routine that is extremely difficult, and on top of that, our mind is getting in the way of that, where maybe it's a routine that we're used to, but if we keep labeling it as something that is insurmountable, then we become worse at that task, especially when we're doing it in front of other people. So again, going back to this idea of cognitive reframing being a very helpful tool to perform in tasks, so that when we are going to perform them, we no longer see it as a threat, but rather a challenge.
Yeah, that's really good. And I like how you talked about how the way you perceive a certain task, it really plays into how you will perform in it. And I think if you see something as, oh, I need to get this perfect and I can't get this perfect, then your performance ultimately won't do as well as if you saw the task as, I can do this, and just ignore the fact that I want to be perfect. So yeah. A closing question is, ballet is such a competitive sport and it's such a competitive art form, and what advice would you give someone trying to protect their self-esteem in a competitive setting?
I think I would go back to the advice that I gave before, and that would be finding other hobbies. So taking on that bottom up approach to self-esteem, where the more things that you do, other hobbies that you could find joy and self-esteem with, will have that trickle up effect, where it will eventually increase your levels of self-esteem. And I know that's very difficult, especially for dancers and athletes, where most of their waking hours are dedicated to that sport, to that form of dance. But maybe finding things like, well, reading a difficult book that you've always wanted to read, even if that means you're taking 5 minutes just to make through a couple of pages, that is something that you could be proud of as well. Maybe if you're someone who loves to sew, maybe making your own practice costumes is something that you're able to do, where you're able to show off your creativity and have other outlets that work around or revolve around the sport. So instead of dedicating a whole amount of time for a separate hobby, what are some forms of expression and opportunities for creativity that you could do that revolve around the sport as well?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important for us dancers to know that we are more than dancers. We have so much more to us than just our sport that we do. And Thank you so much for all your insightful responses. They're really helpful and they're really impactful to me and will be really
Oh,
impactful to my followers. And it was so fun talking to you. And thank you for being on the podcast.
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.